When Ethan Miller drove up the narrow gravel road that curved through the woods, he could already see the roof of his grandfather's old farmhouse peeking between the trees. The late afternoon sun spilled through the leaves, painting soft gold patches on the hood of his truck. For a moment, Ethan slowed down and just breathed. He hadn't been here in almost 10 years, not since his grandfather passed away. The smell of pine and earth felt exactly the same as he remembered. It was quiet, peacefully quiet, the kind of silence you can't find in the city. The place had always been a bit of a sanctuary for him growing up. When things got rough at school or when his parents were too busy with their demanding careers, his grandfather's land was where he felt like himself. Now it was officially his. The old man had left it to him in the will, along with a note that simply said, "Take care of this land. It's your home now." Ethan parked near the porch and stepped out. The wooden boards creaked under his boots. The house needed work, that was obvious. The paint had peeled off most of the siding. One of the shutters hung loosely and the porch swing was missing a chain. But to him it wasn't run down, it was a treasure. He could already picture how it would look once he fixed it up. He stretched, then walked to the edge of the property. Beyond the fence, a line of newly built houses glistened in the distance. He remembered hearing that a big developer had bought the nearby land years ago and turned it into a planned neighborhood. There were neat lawns, identical mailboxes, and cars so clean they looked like they'd never touched dirt. His grandfather's land had been excluded from that sale, though. It was an old estate, private property with its own records that predated everything around it. He thought it was funny in a way, this single farmhouse standing like a stubborn old guard in the middle of all that modern order. He didn't know it yet, but that tiny detail, his independence from the homeowners association, was going to start a storm. As the sun dipped lower, Ethan started unloading supplies from his truck, a toolbox, some groceries, a few boxes of clothes, and a small frame wrapped in a cloth. He carried the frame inside and set it on the fireplace mantel. When he uncovered it, his father's face looked back at him, a formal portrait taken years ago, the kind that hung in courtrooms or news articles. Justice Robert Miller, a name that carried weight. Ethan didn't talk much about who his father was. It was easier that way. People treated him differently once they knew, but here no one knew or cared. Or so he thought. That night, Ethan made a simple dinner, canned soup and toast, and sat outside on the porch with a cup of tea. Fireflies blinked in the distance. He could hear crickets and the faint hum of cars from the nearby neighborhood. It was peaceful. Too peaceful to imagine any kind of trouble. The next morning, he woke up early to get started on repairs. He pulled on an old shirt, grabbed a hammer, and began removing loose boards from the porch railing. The rhythmic sound of nails being pried loose echoed softly. Around 9, a sharp sound broke through the morning calm. A woman's voice, "Excuse me. Hello? You can't just start hammering out here like that." Ethan looked up. A woman in her late 50s stood at the edge of the driveway. She wore a perfectly pressed polo shirt, a sun visor, and carried a clipboard like it was an extension of her arm. Behind her, a shiny silver SUV was parked halfway on the gravel. Her expression was one of practiced irritation. "Can I help you?" Ethan asked politely, setting down his hammer. "Yes," she said briskly, walking closer. "I'm Linda Patterson, president of the Oak Ridge Homeowners Association. You must be new here." He nodded slowly. "Sort of. I actually grew up here." Her eyes narrowed. "Oh? Then you should know that we have community rules about construction noise, property maintenance, and vehicle storage. You're already breaking 3 of them from what I can see." Ethan blinked. "Community rules?" "Yes, the HOA governs this area. Every property within the Oak Ridge boundaries is required to comply with our standards." He smiled patiently. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but this property isn't part of the HOA. This is private land. Been in my family for generations." Linda frowned as if she'd just been told the sky was green. "That can't be right. All the properties around here fall under the association." "Not this one," he said, walking toward her and gesturing at the old wooden fence. "This land's been here long before the neighborhood was built. I have the deeds and records if you'd like to see them." She pursed her lips. "That won't be necessary. We'll just verify it through the HOA board. In the meantime, you'll need to pause whatever this construction is. You're creating a disturbance." Ethan stared at her for a moment, trying to stay polite. "I'm just fixing my porch." "Yes, well, rules are rules," she said firmly, jotting something down on her clipboard. "Also your truck, what model is that?" "Ford F-150, he said, puzzled. Trucks over a certain size are not permitted to be parked in driveways overnight. It's in our guidelines. He let out a small laugh. I'll keep that in mind. She didn't seem to appreciate the humor. She gave him a long look, the kind people give when they're deciding whether you're worth arguing with, then turned sharply on her heel. Expect a letter soon, she said over her shoulder and marched back to her car. Ethan watched her drive off, shaking his head. He'd barely been here 24 hours and was already getting scolded. He brushed it off and went back to work, but something about her tone stuck with him. That kind of self-importance wasn't new to him. He'd seen it before in his father's world. People who got a little bit of power and treated it like a crown. That afternoon, Ethan drove into town for supplies. When he came back, he noticed something odd. A few people from the new neighborhood had gathered near his fence line, whispering and glancing his way. One of them held a phone like they were recording something. He gave a polite wave, but they turned away quickly. It made him uneasy, though he didn't know why. Maybe Linda had already spread some story about him. The next day it got stranger. A white envelope was taped to his mailbox with bold letters that read, "Notice of Violation." Inside was a printed sheet from the Oak Ridge HOA, listing several alleged infractions: unauthorized construction, improper vehicle storage, and unapproved residence modifications. It demanded that he cease all activity until proper approvals were obtained. Ethan chuckled under his breath. Approvals, he repeated, shaking his head. He knew exactly how this would go. He'd call, explain that the HOA didn't have jurisdiction and that would be the end of it. Or so he thought. He dialed the number listed on the letter. After a few rings, he heard the same voice as before. Oak Ridge Association office, this is Linda speaking. Hi, this is Ethan Miller, he said calmly. I got your notice about violations, but I think there's been a misunderstanding. My property isn't under your association. Oh, Mr. Miller, she said, her tone dripping with feigned politeness. Yes, I was just reviewing your case. I've already contacted the county records office. There seems to be a discrepancy with your claim. Discrepancy? He asked. The deed is very clear. Well, until it's resolved, you'll need to comply with HOA regulations, she said briskly. Otherwise, we'll have no choice but to escalate. Ethan's jaw tightened. Ma'am, you can't enforce HOA rules on land that's not part of your association. That's not how it works. Sir, she said, her voice rising slightly. Everyone who lives within Oak Ridge boundaries is subject to the same standards. You're not an exception. He took a breath. All right. Then I'll wait for you to hear back from the county. Good, she said curtly and hung up. Ethan stared at his phone, both irritated and amused. He'd dealt with stubborn people before, but something about this woman's confidence was almost surreal. He knew he was legally in the right, but she acted like her word was law. He shrugged it off again. It wasn't worth losing sleep over. He had more important things to do. Over the next week, Ethan threw himself into work. He repaired the roof, replaced rotten boards, and repainted the porch. He even mowed the grass, partly because it needed it and partly to avoid giving Linda more ammunition. A few neighbors walked by now and then, offering polite nods, but nothing more. He could tell they were cautious. Maybe they'd been warned. One afternoon, while Ethan was painting the fence, he heard that familiar voice again. You're still here? He turned to see Linda standing at the fence, hands on her hips. Today she wore large sunglasses and carried a folder. Good afternoon, Ethan said, wiping sweat from his brow. I've been very patient, she said, but you're making this difficult. He leaned on the paintbrush handle. Difficult how? We gave you notice. You were supposed to stop construction, yet you continue to violate community rules, Ethan sighed. Linda, I already told you this isn't your community. You can't enforce HOA rules on me. She raised her chin. I can and I will. I've already filed a report. The board is reviewing it, and if you don't comply, we'll take legal action. He stared at her for a long moment, then smiled slightly. All right, he said simply. Go ahead. Her expression flickered just for a second. She wasn't expecting him to be so calm. You'll regret this, she said finally, then walked away. That night, Ethan sat on the porch again, watching the sky turn deep blue. He thought about his grandfather and what he'd say if he were still around. Probably something like, "Don't wrestle with pigs, boy. You'll both get dirty and the pig likes it." The thought made him laugh. Still, something about Linda's determination unsettled him. It wasn't just about rules. It was about control. She needed to feel important. Maybe that's what drove her, the need to prove she was in charge even if she wasn't. A few days later, things took another turn. Ethan came outside one morning to find two uniformed men standing by his gate. County code enforcement officers. One of them held a clipboard, the other a camera. "Morning," Ethan greeted cautiously. "Can I help you?" "Are you Mr. Miller?" one of them asked. "That's right. We received a complaint from the Oak Ridge HOA about unpermitted construction on your property." Ethan frowned. "There's no construction here, just repairs. And this property isn't under HOA jurisdiction." The officer nodded. "That's what we're here to confirm." "Can we take a look around?" "Sure," Ethan said, opening the gate. "You're welcome to." They walked around, snapping a few photos of the porch and roof, jotting notes. After about 15 minutes, one of them turned to him. "Everything looks fine to me," the officer said. "I'll file the report, but it doesn't look like you're violating anything." "Appreciate it," Ethan said. When they left, he could see Linda standing on the sidewalk of the nearest house, arms crossed, watching. Her face was tight with anger, like someone who couldn't believe she didn't win. Ethan just gave her a small wave and went back inside. For a while, things quieted down. Days passed peacefully. He worked, he cooked, he sat on the porch at night listening to owls and frogs. He started to think maybe Linda had finally given up. Then, one evening, as the sun was setting, a car pulled up to his driveway. It was Linda again, but this time she wasn't alone. Another woman sat in the passenger seat typing something on a tablet. "Mr. Miller," Linda called, stepping out. "This is official business." Ethan walked over, calm as ever. "Evening, Linda. What's this about?" "This is Melissa, our HOA attorney," Linda said. "We're issuing a formal demand for compliance." Melissa, a younger woman with a tight bun and a professional smile, handed Ethan a folder. "Mr. Miller, the Oak Ridge Association requires all residents within the community boundaries to register their properties. Our records indicate you have not done so." Ethan opened the folder and scanned the pages. "I think you two are wasting your time," he said gently. "This land isn't part of your development. It's private property. Your own legal boundaries stop half a mile that way." The attorney hesitated, glancing at Linda, who looked impatient. "We'll confirm that with the county," Melissa said, trying to sound confident. "You do that," Ethan replied. "And when you do, maybe check who signed the exemption papers back when this neighborhood was approved." Linda looked confused. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," he said, smiling faintly. "Just history. You'll see." They left, but he could feel the tension thickening. Linda wasn't used to being told no, and now that someone had challenged her authority, she wasn't going to stop until she proved herself right, or broke something trying. That night, Ethan sat by the fireplace. The portrait of his father stared down at him, calm and steady. Ethan smiled at it. "You'd love this," he said softly. "A woman trying to arrest me for painting a fence." He didn't know how right he was. The next part of his story would become something none of them could have imagined. But for now, the night was still. The crickets sang. The air was cool, and Ethan, tired but content, closed his eyes, unaware that the calm was about to break. The next morning, the sound of gravel crunching under tires woke Ethan before sunrise. He rubbed his eyes, walked to the window, and saw two vehicles parked outside the gate. One white SUV and another small blue sedan. For a second, he thought it might be delivery people, but then he spotted Linda standing by the SUV, arms crossed, talking to someone on the phone. He sighed. It seemed she wasn't done yet. Ethan made coffee, trying to ignore it, but within minutes the knock came. Sharp, impatient, echoing through the old wood of the front door. He opened it. Linda stood there again, clipboard in hand, her lips pressed tight. Behind her was another man, tall, maybe in his 40s, wearing a collared shirt and carrying a camera bag. He looked more nervous than angry. "Good morning," Ethan said evenly. "You're up early." "We're here to conduct an inspection," Linda said. "This is official HOA business. You've refused to cooperate, so we're taking further action." Ethan leaned on the doorframe, calm but firm. "I told you before, this land isn't under your HOA, you're trespassing." The man beside her cleared his throat. "I was told this property falls within the Oak Ridge limits," he said quietly. "It doesn't," Ethan replied. "You can call the county office to check." Linda's eyes flashed with irritation. "You can't stop us from doing our job. The board voted last night to issue a compliance inspection." "There's no board that governs my property," he said, his patience thinning. You don't have that authority. She ignored him, turning to the man. Take pictures of the structure, the truck, everything. We'll document the violations. Hey, Ethan said, stepping forward. You're not taking pictures of my home. The man hesitated, lowering his camera. Maybe we should confirm. Linda cut him off sharply. Do your job. We're not leaving until we have evidence. Ethan's tone hardened. If you take another step past that gate, you'll be trespassing. I'll have to call the sheriff. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Linda exhaled loudly, like she was dealing with a stubborn child. Go ahead, she said. Call them. I'll save you the trouble. I already did. Ethan stared at her, disbelief flashing across his face. You called the police? Yes, she said proudly. There's an unregistered occupant refusing to comply with community law. I told them to send someone immediately. Ethan couldn't help but laugh softly, shaking his head. You're unbelievable. 10 minutes later, a county sheriff's cruiser rolled down the gravel road. 2 deputies stepped out. One older with a gray mustache and one younger, clearly new to the job. The older deputy looked around. Morning. What's going on here? Linda jumped in before Ethan could speak. Officer, thank goodness you're here. This man is occupying a property illegally. He's doing construction without approval and refusing to cooperate with the homeowners association. The deputy raised an eyebrow and turned to Ethan. Sir? This is my property, Ethan said calmly. It's been in my family for decades. I'm not part of any HOA, she's trespassing. The deputy nodded slowly. You got proof of ownership? I do, Ethan said, disappearing inside. He came back with a folder containing copies of the deed, the exemption paperwork, and a few official letters. Here, everything's in my name. The HOA's jurisdiction ends before my fence line. The deputy flipped through the papers. The younger one leaned over his shoulder, scanning them too. Linda stepped closer. Those are outdated. The neighborhood was expanded. This area falls under Oak Ridge regulations now. Ethan crossed his arms. Then show me the paperwork that says so. She froze. It's being processed. The deputy gave her a long, unimpressed look. Ma'am, unless you have legal documents showing this property is part of your HOA, you can't enforce anything here. Her face flushed. So you're just going to let him break the rules? He's not breaking any rules, the deputy said flatly. And unless you've got an actual complaint involving a crime, this isn't a police matter. Linda's lips trembled with anger. He threatened me, Ethan blinked. What? You said you'd call the sheriff. She snapped. That's intimidation. The deputy sighed. Ma'am, asking someone to leave your property isn't a threat. You need to step off his land before we have a real problem. Linda's expression darkened. You'll regret this, she hissed at Ethan before storming off toward her SUV. The deputies lingered a moment. The older one handed Ethan back his papers. Sorry about that. We deal with her type a lot. Just keep your paperwork handy in case she tries anything else. Thanks, officer, Ethan said. They left, and for a while the property was quiet again. But the peace didn't last. That night, Ethan noticed headlights pausing near his gate, then driving off. It happened again the next evening. Someone was circling his property, watching. He didn't want to jump to conclusions, but he had a feeling he knew who was behind it. A few days later, things escalated. Ethan was fixing the barn roof when he heard shouting from the driveway. He climbed down, wiping his hands, and saw Linda standing there again, this time with 3 HOA members behind her. 2 men and a woman, all wearing matching polos with the Oak Ridge logo. This is harassment, Ethan said, approaching them. This is a lawful inspection, Linda replied coldly. You've left us no choice. You've refused to cooperate, so we're documenting violations ourselves. One of the men lifted a phone and started recording. For evidence, he said stiffly. Ethan stood still, his patience slipping. You don't have any right to record me on private property. Leave. The woman with them looked uncomfortable. Linda, maybe we should just— No, Linda snapped. We're not backing down just because he's being difficult. This is our community. Ethan exhaled slowly, trying to stay calm. Linda, I've been polite every time you showed up here. But you've crossed a line. You keep stepping on private land, ignoring legal documents and calling the police for nothing. I'm asking you nicely one last time, go home. She lifted her chin defiantly. Not until you comply. Fine, Ethan said. Then you can explain to the sheriff why you're trespassing again. When Ethan finished, Mr. Harris took off his glasses and rubbed his chin. She's in deep trouble, son, he said finally. You've got evidence of harassment, false reporting, and now possible fraud. That's a lot more serious than she realizes. I don't want to ruin her life, Ethan said quietly. I just want her to stop. Mr. Harris nodded. You don't have to do anything drastic. Sometimes people like that only stop when they're forced to face consequences. Leave it to me. I'll contact the county and file a cease and desist order on your behalf. Thanks, Ethan said with relief. I really appreciate it. That night he slept a little better, thinking maybe this nightmare would finally settle down. But fate had other plans. The next morning he woke to the sound of people talking loudly outside. He stepped onto the porch and froze. 3 HOA members stood near the fence, putting up a large wooden sign that read, Private Property Dispute, under HOA Review. Ethan walked over, trying to keep calm. What are you doing? One of the men didn't even look at him. Following instructions from the board president. Take that down, Ethan said. You have no right to post that here. The man shrugged. Talk to Linda. Ethan pulled the sign out of the ground himself and set it aside. I am done playing this game, he said quietly. The men exchanged uneasy glances and left. That afternoon, Linda herself came storming down the driveway, her face flushed with anger. You had no right to remove that sign, she yelled before she even reached the porch. You had no right to put it there, Ethan replied calmly. You think you can intimidate me? She snapped. You may have gotten lucky with the police, but the HOA board stands behind me. You can't just defy community law. Ethan stepped closer, his voice calm but firm. This isn't your community, Linda. I've told you that 100 times. But I guess you need to hear it from someone else. What's that supposed to mean? She asked, narrowing her eyes. You'll find out soon enough, he said. That night, Ethan sent a short email to the local news outlet that had shared the original video. He attached copies of the county letter confirming his ownership, the legal notice from Mr. Harris, and a summary of the harassment he'd faced. He didn't ask for publicity. He just wanted the truth on record. Within 24 hours, the story spread like wildfire. Homeowner harassed by HOA, legal documents prove he owns the land. People online rallied behind him. Local news vans even showed up near the property line, though Ethan politely declined to give interviews. He wasn't looking for fame, just fairness. Across the street, Linda's perfect world started to crack. Neighbors whispered. Some of the HOA board members resigned quietly, not wanting to be part of the mess. Others demanded she step down. But she refused. Instead, she doubled down. The next day, Ethan received a letter, not from her directly this time, but from her attorney. It was short, formal, and almost desperate. My client maintains her belief that your occupancy is under dispute. We advise you to refrain from further public statements that may damage her reputation. Ethan laughed under his breath. Reputation was all she cared about. He forwarded the letter to Mr. Harris, who replied within the hour. Ignore it. They're scared. That means you're winning. Days passed, and Linda's anger seemed to grow in silence. She no longer came to his gate, no longer called or emailed. The quiet felt strange, like the eye of a storm. Then one evening, as Ethan was cooking dinner, he heard tires screech outside. He walked out to find another sheriff's cruiser parked by the road. The same deputy from before got out. Evening, Mr. Miller, he said, looking uneasy. Mind if we talk for a second? Sure, Ethan said. The deputy looked almost embarrassed. We got another report from the HOA, same caller. Claimed there was suspicious activity on your property. We already know it's bogus, but I figured I'd check just to close the report. Ethan sighed. She just won't give up, huh? Apparently not, the deputy said. But there's good news. The county's legal department is opening a case on her. They're looking into possible misuse of HOA authority and false reporting. Ethan raised his eyebrows. Really? Yeah. Seems you're not the first person she's harassed. There have been smaller complaints before, but nothing stuck until now. Ethan nodded slowly. About time someone held her accountable. After the deputy left, Ethan sat back down at his table, staring at the flickering candlelight. He didn't feel triumphant, not yet. Mostly he felt tired. But there was also a strange calm in knowing justice was starting to move, even if slowly. Over the next week, letters poured into Linda's mailbox, not from him, but from lawyers, board members, and county officials. She stopped leaving her house. The once proud HOA president was suddenly quiet, her control slipping away. But Ethan didn't celebrate. He just kept working on the farmhouse. He fixed the last loose shutter, repaired the porch swing, and painted the fence a deep warm brown. Every nail he hammered in felt like he was reclaiming something, his peace, his freedom, his home. Then one morning, he got a call that changed everything. It was Mr. Harris again. "Ethan," he said, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. "You might want to sit down for this. What's going on?" "Linda's been officially charged. False reporting, attempted fraud, and harassment. The county prosecutor decided to move forward. And guess what? They found evidence that she tried to access your father's name through legal databases." Ethan froze. "My father's name?" "Yeah," Harris said. "Apparently she wanted to dig into your background, maybe to find something to use against you. But when she realized who your father is," he chuckled softly. "Well, let's just say the look on her face must have been priceless." Ethan smiled faintly. "So she knows now." "Oh, she knows," Harris said. "And judging by the phone calls I've been getting, she's panicking." Ethan didn't say much. He just looked at the portrait of his father hanging above the fireplace. Justice Robert Miller, one of the highest judges in the country. The man had taught him everything about fairness and patience. Ethan had kept that part of his life quiet because he didn't believe in using power to win. But maybe, just maybe, it was time for Linda to learn that lesson herself. That evening, as the sunset washed the sky in orange, Ethan sat on the porch swing he'd finally fixed. The wood creaked softly beneath him. For the first time in weeks, he felt at peace. He didn't have to do anything anymore. The truth had done all the work for him. And somewhere across the neighborhood, in a big house with perfect flower beds and a once proud president, pacing nervously by the window, Linda Patterson finally realized the one thing she'd never understood before. Some people don't need to prove they have power. They just live it. The next chapter of their story was already writing itself, and soon the whole town would hear it. The morning after the call from Mr. Harris, Ethan woke up early. The air was cool, the sun was still hiding behind the hills, and the world felt strangely quiet. He made himself a cup of coffee and sat on the porch watching mist drift across the field. For the first time in a long while, he felt calm. He thought about everything that had happened, the arguments, the false reports, the arrest. It had all felt like some absurd nightmare. But now things were changing. The truth was finally out. Still, he couldn't shake the thought of Linda. What was she thinking right now? He didn't hate her. He pitied her in a way. She'd built her entire identity around control, around being right all the time. And now all that control was slipping away from her hands. A few hours later, Ethan's phone buzzed. It was a message from Mr. Harris again. "She's been summoned for questioning at the county office today. They found clear proof of record tampering. Also, her lawyer is trying to negotiate a settlement. Looks like she wants this to end quietly." Ethan stared at the message for a long time. He didn't reply right away. He just sipped his coffee and looked across the field where the sunlight had begun to break through the clouds. He wasn't sure what to feel. He didn't want revenge. He didn't even want her punished too harshly. He just wanted peace. Around noon, a black car pulled up in front of his property. The driver stepped out and walked toward the porch with calm confidence. Ethan didn't recognize him at first, but the moment he spoke, Ethan froze. "Morning, son." It was his father, Justice Robert Miller. Ethan blinked, stunned for a moment before standing to greet him. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Robert smiled faintly. "I saw the news. I thought I'd better check on you before this circus gets any bigger." Ethan let out a small laugh. "Guess it's hard to stay under the radar when your dad's face is on national TV every other week." Robert chuckled. "You've always been good at avoiding attention. I suppose I should have expected that." They sat together on the porch, father and son, both silent for a few moments, listening to the wind move through the trees. "So," Robert said finally, "tell me everything." Ethan explained everything. From the first day Linda came storming up the driveway to the moment the deputies handcuffed him in front of everyone. He told his father about the fake letters, the threats, the public humiliation, and how she'd tried to change the records. Robert listened quietly, his expression unreadable. When Ethan finished, the older man took a deep breath. "She made a very serious mistake," he said, "and not just legally. She forgot the most basic rule of life, respect." Ethan nodded slowly. Yeah, that's what this whole thing's been about. She never respected anyone else. Robert leaned forward, resting his hands on his knees. You handled this better than most would have. You didn't lash out. You let the truth speak for itself. I'm proud of that. Ethan looked down. I just didn't want to make things worse. I figured if I stayed calm, she'd eventually see she was wrong. His father gave a small smile. People like that rarely see it until they're forced to. And now she's being forced to. They talked for a while longer before Robert stood up. I've got to head back soon, but I'm going to call a few people at the county. Not to interfere, just to make sure this is handled properly. Ethan nodded. Thanks, Dad. Robert placed a hand on his shoulder. You don't need to thank me. Just keep doing what you're doing. Let the truth do its work. After his father left, Ethan sat there for a long while, thinking about everything. The calm breeze carried the faint scent of pine and soil, and somewhere in the distance he could hear a lawnmower. Life was still moving on, even in the middle of chaos. By late afternoon, Ethan received another call, this time from a reporter who'd been covering the story. Mr. Miller, the reporter said, we just got confirmation that the HOA president has been suspended. There's going to be a hearing next week. Do you plan on attending? I hadn't thought about it, Ethan said. Maybe. People are really on your side, the reporter added. Your story's gone viral. Folks are calling you the calm landowner. Ethan laughed softly. That's a new one. Well, if you do attend the hearing, the public will want to hear your side, the reporter said. Ethan thought for a moment before answering. If I go, I'm not going to make a speech. I'm just going to tell the truth. That's all. That evening, the quiet returned, but it wasn't the heavy, tense quiet from before. This was peaceful. For the first time in weeks, Ethan slept soundly. The following week came quickly. The day of the hearing was warm and bright. The county building was crowded with reporters, curious neighbors, and even a few HOA board members who now wanted nothing to do with Linda. Ethan walked in calmly, wearing a simple shirt and jacket. No lawyer beside him, no entourage, just him. Inside the small courtroom, Linda sat at a table with her lawyer. She looked tired. Her perfect hair was messy, her eyes hollow. When she saw Ethan, she looked away. The county commissioner read through the charges: harassment, false reporting, and document tampering. Then he looked up. Mr. Miller, you've chosen to represent yourself. Would you like to say anything? Ethan stood up slowly. Yes, sir. I just want to say that I never wanted things to go this far. I moved here to restore my grandfather's house and live quietly. I never broke any rules, never tried to hurt anyone. I tried to explain that my land isn't under HOA control, but I wasn't listened to. I hope this hearing helps set things right, not just for me, but for anyone who's been treated unfairly. The room was silent. Even Linda didn't speak. After Ethan sat down, the commissioner turned to Linda. Mrs. Patterson, do you have anything to say in response? Her lawyer whispered something, but she shook her head. Then in a low voice, she said, I thought I was protecting the community. I didn't realize I was crossing a line. I made a mistake. It wasn't a full apology, but it was more humility than anyone had ever seen from her. The commissioner nodded and looked down at his papers. Given the evidence, this board recommends your immediate removal as HOA president. You'll also be required to attend a hearing for the county charges separately. A few gasps filled the room, but Ethan stayed silent. After the session ended, people began to file out. Some neighbors approached Ethan, shaking his hand and thanking him for standing up for what was right. Others avoided eye contact, maybe feeling guilty for not defending him sooner. Ethan didn't mind. He wasn't angry. He just felt relieved. As he stepped outside into the sunlight, he saw Linda standing near the steps alone. For a moment, he thought about walking past her, but then he stopped. He turned toward her and said quietly, I never hated you, you know. I just wanted you to understand this wasn't about rules. It was about respect. Linda looked at him, her eyes tired. I know, she said softly. I lost sight of that. Ethan gave a small nod. I hope you find peace, Linda. Everyone deserves it, and even the ones who make mistakes. He walked away, leaving her standing there speechless. Back home, Ethan sat on the porch again, feeling the cool wind brush against his face. The fields were quiet, golden under the setting sun. It felt like everything had come full circle. His phone buzzed again, a text from his father. Proud of you. Justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about teaching. Ethan smiled as he read it. His father was right. Later that night, he received one final email from the new acting HOA president. Mr. Miller, on behalf of the remaining HOA board members, we want to apologize for everything you've been through. You're welcome to attend our next meeting if you wish. We'd like to formally exempt your property from any future HOA involvement. Ethan chuckled quietly. He didn't plan on attending any meetings, but it felt good to see the words in writing. As he looked out at the stars above, the same ones his grandfather used to admire, he felt something deep inside, not victory, but peace. The farmhouse stood proudly behind him, freshly painted, the porch light glowing softly in the dark. The nightmare was finally over. He didn't need to prove anything anymore. Not to Linda, not to the HOA, not to anyone. The land was his. The truth was his, and that was enough. A few weeks passed after the hearing, and life slowly began to feel normal again. The chaos that had taken over Ethan's days had faded like a bad dream, leaving behind quiet mornings and peaceful evenings. The farmhouse finally looked the way he'd imagined it when he first came back. Warm, simple, and full of life. The grass had grown green again, the fences stood straight, and the air carried that clean scent of new beginnings. He spent his mornings fixing small things, painting the last few spots on the barn, and tending to the old garden his grandfather had planted years ago. Sometimes, as he worked, he thought about everything that had happened, how one person's obsession with control had turned into a storm, and how that storm had somehow led him back to his roots. He realized something strange about life. Sometimes peace doesn't come from avoiding conflict. It comes from standing firm in truth without anger. One afternoon, as he sat on the porch drinking tea, a white envelope slid under his front gate. It wasn't from the county or the HOA. The handwriting on it was shaky and familiar. He walked down, picked it up, and opened it carefully. Inside was a short letter. Ethan, I don't expect forgiveness, but I owe you an apology. I've spent the last few weeks thinking about what I did and why I did it. The truth is, I let fear and pride control me. I thought being in charge meant never being wrong. I was wrong. I'm stepping away from the HOA completely. I'm moving to stay with my sister for a while. I hope you find peace on that land. You deserve it. Linda. Ethan read the letter twice, then folded it gently and set it on the porch table. He didn't smile or frown. He just sat quietly watching the wind move through the trees. He thought about all the anger she had caused him, all the sleepless nights and frustration. But now all he felt was calm. Sometimes people learn their lessons the hard way, and maybe that was enough. A few days later, a local journalist visited him again. The story had spread farther than either of them expected. People across the country were talking about it, not as a scandal, but as a story about patience, fairness, and calm strength. The reporter smiled as he walked up the porch steps. You've become a bit of a local hero, you know that? Ethan laughed softly. I'm no hero. I just stood my ground. That's exactly why people admire you, the reporter said. You didn't fight back with anger. You let the truth speak for you, Ethan shrugged. Maybe that's what the world needs more of. Quiet voices that don't yell but still don't bend. The reporter nodded thoughtfully. That's a good quote. Mind if I use it? Ethan smiled. Go ahead. When the article came out, it wasn't dramatic. It was gentle, almost poetic. The headline read, "The man who chose peace over pride." Neighbors who once avoided him began to wave again. Some came by to talk, curious to know more about his grandfather's land. The tension that had filled the community slowly disappeared. People even started helping one another with small things again, fixing fences, sharing tools, planting gardens together. It was as if Ethan's calmness had reminded everyone that they could be better neighbors. One morning, as Ethan was painting the last part of the barn door, an older man from down the road stopped by. He carried a box of fresh apples and handed it to Ethan. Just wanted to say thank you, the man said. You handled everything with more grace than I could have. Ethan smiled. Thank you. I just wanted to live in peace. You earned it, the man said, nodding. We all learned something watching you go through that mess. Sometimes you don't need to shout to be heard. Ethan appreciated that. It wasn't about being right anymore. It was about moving forward. Later that day, Ethan decided to make a small change on the property. He found a smooth wooden board in the shed and carved a simple message into it. The words came naturally. Private property, justice lives here. It wasn't about his father's position or his own victory. It was about what justice truly meant: fairness, patience, and respect. He nailed the sign to the front gate not as a warning but as a reminder. That evening his father called. "How's the old place looking?" Robert asked. "Better than ever," Ethan said. "I finally finished everything." "That's good to hear," his father replied. "And how are you holding up?" Ethan smiled. "I'm good. Peaceful finally." Robert paused for a moment. "You know, when I heard what happened, part of me wanted to call the sheriff myself and straighten everything out right then. But I'm glad I didn't. You handled it better than anyone else could have." Ethan laughed. "You taught me most of what I know about staying calm," his father chuckled. "Then I guess I did something right." They talked for a while longer, sharing quiet jokes and memories of the old days. Before hanging up, Robert said softly, "You've honored your grandfather's land. He'd be proud." Ethan looked out across the fields and nodded. "I hope so." The next morning, Ethan sat on the porch again, watching the sun rise over the hills. Birds fluttered through the trees, and the world felt still and steady. He could hear the distant hum of life, tractors on nearby farms, dogs barking, someone playing music faintly in the distance. He realized that sometimes life gives you storms not to break you but to show you what you're made of. He hadn't wanted this fight, but it had taught him who he really was: patient, strong, and unwilling to be bullied by pride. A month later, he received another letter, this one from the new HOA board. "Mr. Miller, we're hosting a community meeting next week to discuss better ways to manage neighborhood relations. We'd love for you to attend and share your experience if you're comfortable." Ethan thought about it for a day, then decided to go. Not to speak against anyone, but to remind people what kindness and respect could do. The meeting was small, held in a simple community hall. People greeted him warmly when he arrived. The atmosphere was different now, lighter, kinder. When it was his turn to speak, Ethan stood and looked around the room. "I don't have much to say," he began, "but I do know this: rules matter, and so does respect. The best communities aren't built by strict rules or punishments. They're built by understanding. I hope we can all remember that." Everyone nodded quietly. It wasn't a speech full of big words or drama, but it touched people. After the meeting, as he stepped outside into the cool night air, a woman stopped him. She had moved into one of the newer houses. "You made me rethink how I treat people," she said. "I used to judge others without listening." "Not anymore," Ethan smiled. "That's all any of us can do. Learn and do better." When he got home, the porch light glowed warmly against the dark. He sat down, leaned back, and listened to the sounds of crickets filling the night. He felt completely at peace. No more letters, no more shouting, no more threats, just quiet. He thought about how everything had come full circle. The house, the land, the neighbors, even Linda. She had gone her way, and maybe that was what she needed to finally find peace too. Ethan looked up at the stars and whispered to himself, "Grandpa, I did it." The land's safe again. The wind rustled softly through the trees, almost as if answering him. He smiled and closed his eyes, breathing in the calm night air. For the first time in a long time, he felt exactly where he was meant to be. The farmhouse behind him stood strong, not just as a home, but as a reminder that truth and patience always outlast pride and anger. And so, life went on quietly, just the way Ethan had wanted from the start.